2001 was a great year for Nintendo. We had the release of Animal Crossing as well as Luigi's Mansion, both of which would go on to become highly respected franchises. We also got a new Zelda title and the second installment in the Smash Bros. Franchise. But most importantly, Nintendo released the successors to not only their home consoles, but their handhelds as well. The Game Boy Advance and the GameCube, the former of which is the focus here. The Game Boy Advance saw an immense amount of love, and still does today. From Sonic Advance to Mario Kart to even Zelda, this little thing sold pretty well too, selling 81 million units in its lifetime, as well as being a part of the top 10 best-selling consoles of all time. But as the Ancient Prophecy states, with every Nintendo handheld must come a new generation of Pokemon. And so, in 2002 for Japan and 2003 for everywhere else, Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire released, with Emerald releasing 2 years later in 2004 for Japan and 2005 for America, Australia, and Europe. My name is Renegade and welcome to the Pokemon Mainline Retrospect, where I go through every mainline Pokemon game, including remakes, in order of release and see how good these games truly are. Last episode we took a look at Generation 2, aka Gold, Silver, and Crystal, and came to the overall conclusion that they were really good games, but bogged down by being afraid to move away from Kanto and do its own thing. But if you're looking for a way to get into Pokemon, they're perfect starting games. Today we'll be discussing Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, also known as Generation 3. I'll be talking about Fire Red and Leaf Green here, as I'd prefer to cover them as a separate video so that this isn't 2 hours long. Those will be talked about in the next episode, so if you're curious about how I feel about those, look out for that video. Before we begin, however, let me of course run down how this will work for those who haven't watched the last 2 videos. If you already know how this works or just don't care, you can skip to the timestamp on screen now. The retrospect will work as a road to each gym. For example, the first section will be Road to Roxanne, the second will be Road to Brawly, etc. There will also be intermissions in between to talk about version differences, region design, and more. Also keep in mind these are all my opinions, and so I ask that if you do have any criticisms or opinions on what I say or do, feel free to comment about it as long as you stay respectful. With that covered, let's begin talking about Pokemon Generation 3. So, like how I started last time, let's talk about the opening animation a bit. All 3 are fairly similar. I like how they show the pro tag riding a bike while a ton of Pokemon follow. It's also cool how if you play Ruby or Emerald, it'll be land, but Sapphire has ocean. Emerald does really well at setting up the legendaries, and Ruby/Sapphire, showcasing the start of a battle at the end, is pretty cool. It reminds me of how Gen 1 started. Starting the actual game, Professor Oak obviously... Wait a minute, who the fuck is this? You mean to tell me Generation 3 did the thing that Gen 2 should have done? Wow, that's actually great. So instead of Oak starting us off, we have the Professor of the Hoenn region, Professor Birch. The monologue is pretty much the standard monologue though. I picked my gender, and for this playthrough I'll be playing as May instead of Brendan. After Birch's monologue, the actual game starts off really uniquely. Instead of just being in our room, we're now in the back of a truck moving to our new house. Our mum sends us to go set up our clock, and this is weird because what is the point of this? First of all, there's barely any timed stuff in this generation. The only difference the time makes is changing Shoal Cave's water levels and evolving Eevee into Umbreon or Espeon, as well as keeping track of planted berries, but aside from those, there's pretty much no reason for this to exist. The time of day doesn't even change in the overworld. It's always daytime no matter what unless it's for story reasons. You also can't check the time unless you go back to Little Root, so I do not know why they kept this in unless they just forgot to remove it. But moving on, we go next door to meet the neighbors, and so this game does something actually really cool, where the character you don't play as is your rival for the game. For example, I picked May, so Brendan is my rival. Brendan is also a misogynist, so fuck that guy. The character you don't pick will also be the child of the professor, who knows us due to our dad being our gym leader. After saving Birch, he took us back to his lab, and let me keep my starter, Trico, which was nice of him. I then have to go find Brendan. I found him, killed him, got given a Pokedex, and got given some Pokeballs. Now, the Pokedex I do want to bring up because in this game, they made some changes. For example, we now have a National Dex, which allows the player to catch Pokemon not typically available in Hoenn. You unlock this by just trading with Fire Red or Leaf Green. If you're playing Ruby and Sapphire, you can also trade with Emerald to get it. I think the National Dex was a good feature as it lets the player look at all Pokemon instead of just ones available to Hoenn. The Pokedex also got a really cool UI upgrade, as well as a search button so you don't have to scroll for Pokemon now. You can also set the order from numerical to alphabetical to how big they are or their weight. Another thing that got a UI upgrade is the box system. It's a lot more akin now to how it is in modern day games like Scarlet and Violet. Each box has a different setting or background, and I love the style of it a lot. Moving on though, we also now have running shoes, and holy fuck, I'm so happy about this. In Generation 2, I used the speed up button on my legal Nintendo Game Boy Color, because the game was just so kinda slow at times, especially when going through caves, but Gen 3 fixes this by giving us running shoes, which speeds everything up a lot. One thing I will say is this game is weird because it never actually tells you to go to Petalburg, so Game Freak kinda just expects you to know what to do. Like, they just assume you know what Pokemon is about and that you've played the old games, but whatever, I'll head off to Petalburg anyways. Getting to Petalburg, I did find a berry tree, and I need to mention that there is a pocket for berries now, which, thank fucking god. Essentially, there was no pocket for berries in Gen 2, and it sucked because berries were very common to find, and so they got mixed in with normal items like rare candies or potions. Also, speaking of the bag, I might as well just talk about it here. The bag did get an improvement. Obviously, there's the berry slot, but now the storage each pocket has been increased massively. The items pocket can now hold 30 different items at a time compared to 20, and the berries, key items, TM/HMs, and Pokeballs pocket are large enough to hold each different item of their category. So Pokeballs can hold every Pokeball, the berries pocket can hold every berry, etc. Which I do get how this could be seen as a bad thing because it takes away the deciding aspect of having to figure out what items to take with you, but I honestly just prefer this. The item limit is annoying, and maybe that's because I grew up at a time where the item limit was completely gone. Still, I just prefer it to be almost limitless. Anyways, upon entering Petalburg, I met my dad at his gym, and we were forced to go help this Wally motherfucker catch a Pokemon. And like, this is a fun tutorial. It's a lot better than some random guy coming up to you and telling you how to do stuff, even though we've never met before. But I wish I had the option to skip him catching it. Like, yes, Wally, I've played this game before. I don't care about you catching a Ralts. While going through Petalburg Forest, I ran into a Team Aqua member, and yes, I said Team Aqua and not Team Rocket because Game Freak decided they actually wanted to be original with this game and not piggyback off Kanto again, which you'll actually notice a lot. You encounter barely any Johto or Kanto Pokemon at the start of the game, and a lot of the trainers have purely Hoenn Pokemon. There's also no mention of Professor Oak or anyone from Kanto, which is a really good thing, as my big issue with Gold and Silver was how it massively relied on Kanto, and Johto felt sidelined in its own game. Anyways, we save the guy being attacked by Team Aqua, and he gives us a Great Ball, which is fine, I guess. And then I just headed on forwards to Rustboro City. I ran into twins on the way there who serve as an intro to the double battle system, and I gotta say, double battles are really interesting. It's a great way to mix up the battling system from previous games, and it's also a lot better for XP. Speaking of which, the XP system in this game is surprisingly good. Now, keep in mind, I am playing on an emulator, so I do have the option to speed stuff up, but even if I didn't, I don't feel like I would get bored just grinding normally, because even for a sped up game, I do think I was getting XP pretty fairly and quickly. It wasn't too overpowered and it wasn't too underpowered. Overall, a good XP system. Let's just hope it can stay balanced throughout the entire game. There's also quite a fair bit to do in Rustboro. You can get the HM for Cut there, and you can also get the Quick Claw by talking to a teacher. Also, one thing I didn't mention in Petalburg because I didn't know how to fit him in, but there's also this guy called Scott who will be a recurring character. He's basically just looking for really strong trainers and eventually will invite you to the Battle Frontier upon beating the Pokemon League. Finally, let's talk about the Roxanne fight. Having Wingull and Trico basically made the gym insanely easy, as Rock tends not to fare well against water and grass. Alright, let's move on. While going to stop the Team Aqua member who just robbed the man, Trico evolved into Grovyle, and something kinda funny happened. Trico learns Pursuit at level 16, and Grovyle learns it at level 17. So this motherfucker kept trying to get me to make him learn Pursuit, even though I didn't want to. Anyways, I took the Aqua member down easily and gave the Devon goods back to the president of the company, and in return I was given a Pokénav. And this shit is genuinely awesome, I love it. First of all, the calling feature is back from Gold, Silver, and Crystal, and the UI for the Pokénav is actually so great. It's just really well designed and easy to use. You can really tell Game Freak was taking advantage of the Game Boy Advance's hardware with this game, and I love it. Upon getting the Pokénav, you have to go to Mr. Briny in the bottom of Route 104, but first there's a fight with Brendan. The fight was fine, easy sweep, then I went back to Mr. Briny, and I do think it's cool how you actually get to see the trip to do for town, instead of just fading in and out to get there. But it does go on for a little too long. I also like how your dad calls you during this. It's random and out of nowhere, it makes the characters you meet feel more lively and real. Not even gonna lie, I genuinely suffered with Brawly because I underestimated the fuck out of him. The gym trainers were fine, his gym challenge was really cool, beating the trainers lights up the area, but then his Makuhita came in and wiped my team, so yeah, this took a second attempt, which I went to Granite Cave and grinded for a bit. Even on the second run he was still pretty tough, but I did actually manage to defeat him this time and got the Knuckle Badge. Before we move on to Watson's Road, however, it's time for an intermission about version differences.
Pokemon Ruby and Pokemon Sapphire, only for Game Boy Advance, rated E for everyone.
So, this is of course a Pokemon game, meaning that it has Pokemon exclusive to each version. Let's start off with Ruby, shall we? So, the only Pokemon you can't obtain in Ruby without trading from Sapphire or Emerald are Lotad, Lombre, Ludicolo, Sableye, Seviper, Lunatone, and of course Kyogre. In Sapphire, the only Pokemon you can't obtain without trading from Ruby or Emerald are Seedot, Nuzleaf, Sentry, Mawile, Zangoose, Solrock, and obviously Groudon. And finally with Emerald, the only Pokemon you can't obtain without trading from Ruby or Sapphire are Surskit, Masquerain, Meditite, Medicham, Roselia, Zangoose, and Lunatone. Emerald also made a fuck ton of changes to the overall story and game. I made an entire video ranting about third versions, which you can check out if you want after you finish this one obviously. But to sum it up, I think a lot of the changes made in Emerald were extremely unnecessary, such as replacing all of the contests with battle tents or changing the entire final boss of the game from Steven to Wallace. It just leads to Emerald feeling more like a sequel than a definitive edition of Ruby and Sapphire, and it causes a lot of problems when picking what version to check out, as if you choose to play Ruby or Sapphire, you'll have a completely different experience to those who chose Emerald, and vice versa. I also think it sucks because it just makes people feel forced to play Emerald due to it being the best version. I don't really feel like going through every change Emerald made, so if you're curious, I'll leave the link to Bulbapedia down in the description. But let's start Road to Wattson. So, this starts off with going to look for Steven, since now that I've beaten Brawly, I can now see everywhere in Granite Cave by using Flash. After we found Steven and gave him the letter, I was supposed to go to Slateport, but I ended up catching an Aron, and so I spent a few minutes leveling and caught a shiny out of nowhere. This is the first ever shiny I've caught naturally, which is really cool. It's not important here at all, but I figured I'd mention it. Also, while I didn't record them, I've been getting a few calls from people such as a trainer called Elliot, who I fought outside of Granite, and Roxanne, the Rustboro gym leader, and I gotta say, I love how much more of a feature the calls feel like in this game. Obviously they were in Gold and Silver, but I only had like 3 or 4 numbers the entire game, and the only one to ever call me was Elm, but only when it was plot relevant. In Gen 3, I'm getting a lot of calls just from out of nowhere, even when they aren't relevant at all. Like Elliot talking about how he almost caught a Wingull, but it got away. It's just kinda great, and like I said earlier, it makes the characters and trainers you meet all feel like real people just living their lives. Getting to Slateport was fun. There's a beach where you can get 6 soda pops for taking on this guy's challenge, and there's a few items spread about. But other than that, it's straight on to Slateport, and I love the look of this town. I like how there's a little market going on, and the battle tent is a fun addition, though I wish it didn't replace the Pokemon contest there. Also, I highly recommend going to the Team Aqua line, there's some fun interactions there. Team Aqua's takeover was overall pretty simple. I took out 2 grunts and they just dipped. I then just moved on to Malville, really. Got a bike in Malville, which was fun, picked the Acro bike 'cause it's red, and grinded a bit to fight Wattson. I also got the shiny Makuhita evolved into Hariyama. The fight with Wattson was absolutely brutal. I got it done, but it was pretty tough actually. He's got some really good moves. It doesn't help that in this generation, all AI can use super potions, full restores, etc. Even just casual trainers will use them, and I think that's a great way to make the games a lot tougher, but either way, it's time to start heading towards Flannery. So, Lava Path. Really short cave, but outside of it was Team Magma, who finally felt like existing in the story. They say their boss is in Falabar Town, which means I won't be going straight to Lava Ridge Town to fight Flannery. On the way to Falabar, I was taught about secret bases, and I think these are genuinely kinda cool. I couldn't really decorate mine a lot because I didn't have anything for them, but I definitely want to in the future. But anyways, Falabar Town is a really unique looking town as it's located on top of a mountain close to a volcano. It's a small place, but I think the area looks great, easily one of my favourites in the game. Moving on, the Meteorite Falls encounter didn't take long at all. Team Magma got away and Aqua chases after them. Though Meteorite Falls does look really nice, I went back to the entrance of Lava Path so I could use the cable car and start Magma, and it's really neat how you can actually see Aqua and Magma fighting. Maxie is a pretty decent villain who makes his motives and reasoning clear in his first appearance. He wants to increase the landmass a ton so that humanity can thrive, as before we were able to travel across the seas, humanity thrived off the land. This encounter makes Magma a lot more threatening than Aqua in my opinion, because in Aqua's encounters they were just stealing random shit and goofing off. And even after we beat Magma, Aqua is pretty neutral towards us. Though, despite this, I prefer both of these teams to what Team Rocket was in Gens 1 and 2. I said a lot in those videos how Team Rocket never really felt like a threat, and in Gen 2 they were just pure comedic relief. But Magma and Aqua both managed to pull off that balance decently. And while I do think Aqua could be a little better in the threatening side of things, I still think they beat Team Rocket in the comedy side. Flannery was tough as fuck. I destroyed her first 3 Pokemon with ease, but Torkoal was just stupidly overpowered for no reason. Cool gym though. As is what happens with at least one gym in this series so far, nothing really happens in this section, which is kinda weird and completely unexpected. Like, I genuinely don't know if I missed something here, but I wish this part of the game was more story intensive, especially as it's supposed to be a big character moment where you face off against your dad. It's been hyped up for basically the last 4 gyms. But instead, nothing really happens here, which is really upsetting. As for the fight itself, it was good. About as challenging as you'd expect for the 5th gym. I definitely made it harder on myself because I wanted to beat it with Skunkly, aka the Aron I picked up earlier, when I could have easily beaten this gym with just Makuhita, but it's fine. A little more challenge than hurt. But hey, my Pokemon can swim now. After kicking my dad's ass, Wally's dad rudely interrupted and thanked me for being nice to his son by giving me surf. Yippee, water. It also means I can finally start traveling over to Winona and I can swim. While traveling over to Winona, Steven jumps me and gives me this very random speech about using different kinds of Pokemon. I don't know why, it's very out of nowhere and kinda generic, but okay, I guess fine, you do you, Steven. Then I found the Weather Institute in which Team Aqua was using and abusing a cast form to change the weather. I very quickly took care of that. Like always, Aqua wasn't much of a threat, and I got a free cast form out of it. They get word of Team Magma being over at Mount Pyre, so they headed over there. After that, I ran into the misogynist fuck known as Brendan, and also kicked his ass hard. Brendan's definitely a lot weaker compared to that of Silver or even Blue, but misogyny jokes aside, he's pretty darn likable compared to the other two. He's still competitive, but he's also not a total asshole, and while he is pretty much a static character, not really having much of an arc in the game, is that really a bad thing? Especially after their last 2 attempts at a character arc were questionable at best. So yeah, it's probably better they went with more of a static character here. Then I got to Windtree, spoke to Steven to get the dev scope, yada yada yada. Let's just skip to the gym battle. Winona took me 4 goddamn attempts, and I only won because I got lucky. Winona's gym focuses on the flying type, so when you combine that with constant healing, a lack of counters, and her using a move that if she raises her attack twice, she'll be able to one-shot you, yeah, this is pretty damn stressful. The only reason I won is because she chose to go for another Dragon Dance instead of attacking. 1 attack and the run would have been over. Fuck Winona. I'm so mad at her that I'm not even gonna go straight to Tate and Liza. We're talking about region design first.
Beautifly. Shroomish.
Rico.
Latios. Latios.
Corfish.
Azurill Volbeach.
Mudkip, Kecleon.
Zigzagoon. Makahita.
What's happening, Pikachu?
Pikachu. Lotad.
Jigglypuff.
Rated for everyone.
This has to be one of the best regions in all of Pokemon's history. Firstly, I love how connected everything is. This is something all 3 regions that we've looked at so far have done pretty well, but Hoenn especially excels in this area in my personal opinion. I also am a big fan of the diversity of the region's biomes, and I think all in all this comes down to Hoenn being the first mainline game to have full colour instead of partial colour like Gens 1 and 2 had. You've got deserts now, the water areas are way more open than they were before, and the caves are very large in scale too, while also each having their own unique colour palettes. You've also got this really cool area completely covered in volcanic ash due to there being a volcano in the centre of it as well. And on top of that, you can actually collect the ash on the ground and trade it in for items. The world just feels a whole lot more lively now as well. Again, I think it's the colour thing that really boosts it, as well as the power of the advance. While this doesn't quite tie into the region design, it's still worth pointing out how the characters just feel a lot more lively and real now, especially with the phone calls and how they can just call you whenever they feel like it, and tell you about something that happened to them. Overall, I really do just love Hoenn as a region, and I think it takes everything that worked well for Kanto and Johto and makes it into one well-blended, perfect place. And finally, after a lack of story, we're back. First off, getting to Lily Cove, there's a bunch of random aquagrunts dotted around as this is where their base is located, but I'm unable to properly access it because I need to do a bunch of story-related build-up things that the game doesn't really make clear to you unless you speak to the aquagrunts blocking the rest of the hideout from being accessed, where they'll straight up just tell you where to go. First of all, I had to head to Mount Pyre, which is where the orbs needed to summon Groudon and Kyogre were. Maxie and Archie had already taken the orb, but Maxie left the Magma Emblem behind, which let me go to Mount Chimney and open the secret base there. And this secret base was pretty tedious to get through. First of all, it requires strength, which is a HM that you can easily avoid, so I had to go all the way to Verdant Turf, where the HM was located, and get it from the cave. Then, on top of that, the secret base has encounters enabled, with multiple floors before you reach Maxie and Groudon. And I couldn't go 5 seconds without an encounter. It was incredibly annoying. Thankfully, due to my special Game Boy Advance that Nintendo gave me, I have a speed up button, so it wasn't too bad. The Maxie fight was fairly easy. The biggest annoyance was his Crobat, who kept spamming Confuse Ray and Wing Attack and Air Cutter, but other than that, he wasn't too tough. After that, it was time to go to Slateport, in which Archie takes the submarine, and I need to go back to Lily Cove to stop him. The Aqua Base wasn't nearly as annoying in my opinion, because the War Panel puzzles weren't that bad. I was also able to get the Master Ball here, but I failed to catch up to Archie, so then I went straight to Moss Deep Gym to take on Tate and Liza. Overall, Tate and Liza's gym battle was fairly easy. There was a bit of trouble, but I still did it on the first attempt. The gym challenge was annoying as fuck though. Upon beating Tate and Liza, I headed down to the spaceport to beat Team Magma, who ended up coming to their senses and gave up fighting. Steven also gave me the HM for Dive for helping him, which was cool. You know what time it is though? It's time to complain again. So earlier I praised the region design for the ocean being vast and explorable. However, now I'm not so sure that's a good thing, and let me explain why. I do like the ocean being explorable, but because of how big it is, it's almost impossible to see where you're going, especially when you're looking from a top-down perspective and no minimap. I spent so long looking for the Seafoam Cavern, and even longer looking for Sky Pillar, and the diving mechanic didn't make this much easier. Along with encounters, rocks at every damn corner, and trainers all over the place, this was annoying as fuck. However, speaking of Sky Pillar, once you confront Archie and Maxie, the endgame starts. Finally, we get to see the epic battle of Groudon and Kyogre, and I gotta say, this is really fucking cool. Getting to see Kyogre and Groudon confront each other, and then watching Rayquaza fly down and resolve it all is really incredible and well made. They were really putting the new technology to good use here. I also like how Team Magma and Team Aqua end. Does it feel kinda rushed? Yeah, I think so. But it's heartwarming seeing them put their differences aside and realize what they wanted for the world was not only unrealistic but incredibly dangerous. Overall, I fully believe Team Aqua and Magma were much better villains than Team Rocket. Their goals actually made sense, and at least for Magma, I felt like they were actually a threat. Aqua was definitely much more comedic relief, which I don't mind. At the end of the day, Pokemon is a kid's game, and I think they wanted to transition naturally into more morally complex villains without losing that charm Team Rocket had. And overall, Aqua still works as one of the antagonistic forces. It just definitely feels like you can see which one they want it to be the comedic one and which they want it to be the serious one. Moving on, I wasn't going to talk about catching Rayquaza, mainly because, well, yes, he's one of the big three for this gen. I didn't think it was all that interesting, especially since it's not necessary to beat the game, and I'm still not going to talk about it. In fact, I'm going to talk about how you get to Rayquaza, because oh my god, I fucking hate Skypillar. To climb Skypillar, you require the Mac Bike, a bike that doubles the speed you go when holding down one of the buttons on the D-pad or arrow keys if you're playing on an emulator, and on paper, this seems like a fun concept. Use the Mac Bike to quickly traverse across the ground that is falling beneath you. But here's the issue. The Mac Bike is on a delay, and the area you traverse is so insanely tight with little to no freedom that doing this takes forever. I'm lucky that I'm playing this on an emulator so I get the benefits of save states, because I genuinely would have given up on Rayquaza without save states. This puzzle is so incredibly frustrating that if it wasn't for Rayquaza being level 70, I'd argue that it's not even worth it. The To Juan battle was pretty easy, which I honestly don't mind. It's nice to have an easy battle after dealing with actual hell for the last few hours of playtime. The gym challenge was kind of confusing though, mainly because they don't make it clear what you're meant to do, but once I figured it out, it was fine. And with that said, it's finally time for the road to victory. Upon arriving at Victory Road, we run into, get this, Wally. Yeah, why? This feels like they just completely forgot Wally existed until like the last minute, and so shoved him in somewhere. Wally's last appearance before Victory Road is literally right before the third gym. The only other time he gets mentioned after this is after you beat Norman, but that's only a mention. He doesn't actually appear at all. He talks about how he's thankful he met the player and all that, and how one day he'll catch up, but it's just like, what do you mean? I barely know you, you're barely in the damn game. You don't get to see him progress as a character and as a trainer. He just appears, leaves for 90% of the game, and then reappears out of nowhere. Personally, I think this moment would have been much better if they did one of two things. One being have Wally appear all throughout the game, maybe after every 2 or so gyms, so you actually see him build his team and get stronger, or 2 being just remove Wally altogether and have Brendan be here instead. Who, by the way, you don't even get to see him fully evolve his starter. In Emerald, Brendan's last battle is in Lily Cove, and he still has a Combusken, along with a Ludicolo, Pelipper, and Tropius. And that battle, by the way, is optional. His last required battle is in Route 119, where he has a Combusken, Lombre, and Pelipper. Overall, I just think this game handles its rivals kinda poorly. Between Brendan and Wally, neither really feel like a challenge or like they're on par with the player. One of them isn't in 90% of the game, and the other leaves before he can even get a full team. Other than that, there really isn't much to talk about with Victory Road itself. It's very simple and pretty much what you'd expect. So I guess it's time for the Elite Four. Sydney was shockingly easy. Took his first 2 mons out with Sceptile and then went in with Rayquaza and sweeped. Cool design, but didn't put much of a fight. Phoebe was pretty annoying, mainly because she wouldn't stop spamming Protect, but I got her out of the way easily once both of her desktops were finished. Glacio put up a pretty tough fight, shockingly. I thought I'd sweep her team, but I found out Blizzard is incredibly strong. I was surprised, because to be honest, I thought when you treat your employees like shit, it'd hurt the stability of the company, but I guess I was wrong. Oh wait, fuck, wrong Blizzard. And Drake overall was a decent challenge. Not much I can say about him, but he's pretty cool. But with the Elite Four down and out, that means it's time for the champion Wallace. Yeah, Wallace. Wallace wasn't bad, but nothing's gonna hold up against the level 71 Rayquaza. And that was it, I became the champion. Brendan with Professor Birch appeared out of nowhere. I get why Brendan's here, but I'm very sick of these professors appearing like they were an important part of the journey, even though they really don't appear all that much. I wish the professors were given more screen time in all honesty, and before I forget, here's the Hall of Fame team. Before I move on to the final thoughts, let's take a minute to appreciate the soundtrack.
Enter the greatest adventure ever! With more than 100 new Pokemon and new 2-on-2 battling, Pokemon Ruby and Pokemon Sapphire, only for Game Boy Advance.
The soundtrack of this game is incredible, and easily my favourite of the 3 gens I've covered so far. Instead of ranting about the tracks, just take a listen to them for yourself. So, final thoughts. Well, I think this gen is very, very close to perfect. Gameplay-wise, it's absolutely brilliant. The XP system is very fair and never felt like a chore to level up with, even when I didn't use rare candies, which was mainly later in the game because I wanted to get this video out on Pokemon Day. I was leveling up very fast on my own. And unlike Gen 2, the levels of each gym and Elite 4 member were all perfect. There was never a part of the game where I felt I was too strong or I felt too underleveled. Whenever I was having trouble, for the most part, it didn't feel unfair. There was an actual challenge. Now, I say for the most part because you obviously have battles like the Winona gym battle, which is just blatantly unfair and genuinely comes down to luck unless you overlevel the hell out of your Pokemon, but that's one battle compared to pretty much the entire game. However, one thing I didn't like much about this game was how it returned to Generation 1's ideals of expecting the player to go somewhere without actually telling them. It's not nearly as bad as it was in Gen 1, but it absolutely is present, and it even occurs during core story moments, which is insanely frustrating. This isn't a problem, obviously, if you're a veteran player, but for first-time players or for people who haven't touched the game in potentially decades, it's absolutely an issue. The ocean doesn't help either. There really was too much water here. I know I said I wanted them to expand on the water routes, but wow, they didn't just add some more water, they fucking flooded the place. The water routes are so massive that it becomes near impossible to navigate properly. It's a very cool concept on paper, but in execution it is frustrating. The rest of the region is pretty well designed, and even the water parts have their positives, such as Pacific Town. Now, story-wise, in terms of story, I think this is much better than Gens 1 and 2. It's very straightforward, and the villains have way better writing. However, there's still some questionable stuff. I already had the whole rant about Wally and Brendan, and how I think they were kinda mishandled, and Team Aqua, while good comedic relief, could have been more of a threat to the player in the same vein that Team Magma was. But other than that, the story's pretty good. It's nice commentary about the state of the world, and it's good to see the villains actually develop and see what effects their actions have had on the world instead of getting beaten like twice and then just giving up for no reason, unlike a certain Gen 1 villain. I also think the idea of one of your parents being a gym leader was really cool and gives you another thing to strive for in your journey. It also helps to make the gym leaders feel more like people. Speaking of which, I'm happy the phone system got a massive upgrade. I always loved getting random calls from trainers I had battled telling me what they'd gone up to, or even seeing main characters call me. The world feels so much more alive and real in these games. Like, these are actual people I could speak to every day. On top of that, while I didn't speak about the post-game, that's because there's just so much to do. There's the battle tents, the battle frontier, Trainer Hill, a Steven rematch, contests, Mirage Island, the Trick House, etc. There's so much, and I just don't know how I'd fit it all in. Emerald is a very, very close to perfect game, and all it needs is some minor adjustments to get to perfect. This is Pokemon in its purest, unfiltered form. It's challenging while also not being impossible and unfair on the player. All the mechanics added are insanely enjoyable and great new additions. If you're looking for a great time and a great Pokemon game, this is it. This is the one. With that said, however, Gen 3 isn't over yet, because Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald weren't the only mainline games that were released in this generation. We also had Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, which were remakes of the original Generation 1 games. Which means yes, unfortunately we have to return to Kanto, but not today. That'll be the next episode in this mainline retrospect. So for now, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.